Good morning, Algebra 1. It's Tuesday, it's a bright sunny morning. Hope you get outside for a little bit, a little chilly though. Hey, today we're going to learn something new about finding zeros on the parabola. So it's the same thing we've been doing. We are completing the square is going to show us where a parabola crosses on the x-axis at. It's just a different way to do it, and it comes important later on in Algebra 2 as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and take off on that. To complete the square, what you're doing is you're putting a number in here that will make this a perfect square. And by a perfect square, I mean something like, well, let's do this one and see. What you want to do is you want to take half of the middle number. So you want to take 10 and divide it by 2. And after you do that, you want to square that number. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. So that completes the square, and that's because if I put a 25 right here, this right here would be the same thing as x plus 5 times x plus 5, which is equal to x plus 5 squared, and that's where it gets its name from. Okay, so that's for number 1. Now sometimes they're rude to you and they put an odd number in the middle. You still do the same thing. You're going to take -5 and you're going to divide it by 2, and then you're going to take and you're going to square that number. So you do them separately. -5 squared, -5 times -5 is 25, and 2 squared is 4. And then that would actually, if you take the square root of 25 over 4, it's 5 over 2. So this would give you x minus 5 over 2 squared. And so you still completed the square. Some people would rather write 12 and 1/4 for that. That's up to you. Okay, so now let's look at some real problems here. Those are just kind of getting used to a little bit. So if I want to complete the square in this, the first thing you want to do is write down x squared plus 6x plus blank equals -2. That blank's very important. Okay, now we're going to take half of 6, which is 3, and we're going to square it just like we learned up there. So 3 squared is 9. We're going to put a plus 9 here. Now as soon as you put your plus 9 in right here, go over here immediately and do it over here, because that's the biggest mistake people make, is they forget to add 9 to both sides. They only do it to 1. So now if we take what we learned up here, this would be x plus 3 squared. This number right here is always a square root of whatever you put there. Equals, over here we do the math, -2 plus 9 is 7. Okay, so now we got to get rid of the square, and so I take the square root of both sides, and I get that x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 7. I'm stuck with the square root of 7 because there's no equal on that, and that's fine. The last thing you have to do is subtract 3 from both sides. And so we get x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 7. And that is the way you leave your answer. Even though it looks ugly, that is the answer, and we're done. Okay, let's try one more that has a odd number in it. So I'm going to start the same exact way. I'm going to do x squared plus x plus a blank equals 12. That blank's very important. Okay, now right here the coefficient's 1. So I have to take 1 divided by 2, which is a half, and square it. So 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. So over here this is 1/4. All right, so what I'm going to end up here is x plus 1/2 squared. So if you look back here, this number was half of 6. That's how you get the 3. Half of 1 is 1/2, so that number is going to go right here. And so that helps you out a little bit. This equals, now over here it's a little bit tricky. You got to go 4 times 12 is 48, plus 1 is 49 over 4, and they'll do that to you. They'll make it so it comes out nice. Take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus 1/2 equals, well, the square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 4 is 2, plus and minus. Okay, so what we've got to do is we've got to subtract 1/2 from both sides to get the x alone. So then we get x equals So a positive 7 halves minus 1 halves would be 6 halves, which equals 3. And the second time I want to use the minus, negative 7 halves minus 1 half would be negative 8 halves. And negative 8 halves would be the same thing as negative 4. And so the two answers here would be 3 and negative 4. This one also has two answers, you just can't tell because you're not going to have to go, if the square root doesn't come out even, then you can just stop right here. Okay, so this is completing the square, and I gave you 2 through 4 is just answers like these here. 5 through 10 is problem steps, answers, that's like this. So you've got 9 problems there to work on. Hope it goes well for you. Call if you have questions.